Right, for his analysis on the Morrison government's hunt for this magic number of vaccinations and a whole lot more bellicose rhetoric from Beijing's propaganda machine, I'm joined from Melbourne by the foreign editor of the Australian newspaper, Mr. Greg Sheridan. As always, Greg, I can hear my audience cheering that you're on the show. They love hearing from you. Talk to me about this debate about this number. I mean, the PM puts a plan out there. We've all been saying, where's the plan? Well, thank God we've now got a plan. But the key detail is the number at which we start to get our freedoms back. There's been a handful of Liberal backbenchers throwing around numbers to get from stage 1 into stage 2. Jason Falinski says it has to be 50%. Tim Wilson says 60%. There's been a number of expert epidemiologists saying it's got to be up in the 70s. Some even say the 80s. It's not like that in the UK and the US. I'm not going to ask you for a number, but I'm keen to ask you, how has the PM gone wresting back control of this issue?
Well, Peter, it's great to be with you. Look, I don't want to give the PM a kicking here because he is on a hiding to nothing, and this is an impossible situation. I think he could give some guidance about numbers. One of the problems is that you can't really have a roadmap into the future with this virus because the virus keeps changing. What would have been a sensible roadmap for the Wuhan virus didn't make any sense for the Alpha virus and makes no sense at all for the Delta virus. Now, the most senior politician who keeps giving us a figure is the New South Wales Premier, Gladys Berejiklian. Now, I'm an admirer of Gladys, but I find her position a bit hard to follow. She says she's the most ambitious leader in Australia for dealing with COVID and not panicking and all that. But the figure she keeps quoting is 80%. Now, if she means 80% fully vaccinated with double jabs, well, no one in the world has that figure. Not Israel, not the United Kingdom, not the United States, no one in the world. And we'll never get to that figure. It's very unlikely we'll get to 80% double jabs. You would have thought it's probably around 60% to move from phase 1 to phase 2, but you have to see how the virus itself is behaving at that time. And then we've also become pampered by our own success. We won't put up with much in the way of COVID death. Some of that has been sensible enough because if it gets out of control, all of a sudden you've got thousands of people in hospital. And even now in New South Wales, we've got 6 people in intensive care and 2 of them on ventilators and everything, and with only really a handful of cases. But on the other hand, you can't say you're going to have nil deaths forever. That's not realistic either. So the Prime Minister being a bit suck it and see, I'm not too critical of him.
Look, the Liberal in me cares about the opportunity, and then people take it up. That's their choice. I don't like the idea of mandatory vaccinations. I think that you have to have one to work in aged care, but I wouldn't want to have to jab everyone in aged care. I think that's a choice they still have to make, the job or the jab. But I am much more of a fan of making sure that anyone in the community that wants a jab, we still have issues with supply, we have constraints in the age cohorts that have their vaccination. I just think everyone's got to have an opportunity to have a jab. If they've had that opportunity and it's been there for some time, they've chosen not to have it, well, they can't hold back the rest of the country from opening up. And I think that's the landing point the PM has to get to. I want to get to another issue. This is the whole scrambling that's going on ahead of this UN meeting a little bit later on in the month in relation to the Great Barrier Reef classification pushed, we're told, by China, that it is named as in danger. The Environment Minister, Susan Lee, she's enlisted, we're told, 11 countries, including France, Britain and Canada, to help prevent a downgrade. She says it's being pushed by China. They are chairing the World Heritage Committee meeting, as I said, at the end of the month. A downgrade would be devastating. Greg, I lived through this a few years back in the PM's office. There was a push on, it was resisted. Australia won the day. But I'm interested in the politics. How likely is it that if Beijing succeeds or not here, that they're going to use other international bodies to try and damage Australia's reputation?
Well, Peter, I think it's overwhelmingly likely that they'll do that. Beijing, they're not 12 foot tall. They're not incapable of making mistakes. They're not giants and us are pygmies. But on the other hand, they are very sophisticated and single-minded in their pursuit of power. They fuse all elements of national power in a way that we don't. And one of their elements of national power is their increasing leadership role in international organisations, which they basically purchase. You know, they use a lot of money and they get a lot of influence. Now, under Donald Trump, to some extent, the US retreated from these organisations. Sometimes that's a good thing to do. These organisations are so bad, sometimes you're best to turn your back on them. But others of these organisations still have a lot of power. And if the good guys turn their back on them, then the bad guys get to use them. And I think it's likely that, well, Beijing certainly has more diplomatic power than we have. But if we're helped by our allies, the United States and Britain, but also we need our Asian allies on this, Japan and South Korea and India and Singapore and so on. But China could use a lot of these international organisations to harm us and to harm our other friends. And, you know, that one sad lesson out of all this is that we have to be engaged in all these loopy UN bodies because God knows what they'll do to us if we're not.
Well, let's talk about Taiwan, because this is just days after Xi Jinping reiterated his pledge for complete reunification of Taiwan. A Chinese magazine has released a video simulating an invasion of the island. It was published on the Naval and Merchant Ships magazine site, shows a surprise attack on Taiwanese forces. How seriously should we take videos like this, Greg?
Well, I think this was quite a convincing video in its way, because what it showed was a missile-led attack by China on Taiwan. And I think if there is to be a direct attack by China on Taiwan, it will be very heavily reliant on missiles. Now, the Chinese may have other plans. They may be misleading us. They might do a special forces-led operation. But the logical way for China to take Taiwan is to destroy all its air defences with missiles, destroy all its counterforce capabilities with missiles, and then more or less have an unimpeded road to occupation unless the Americans intervene. Now, the fact that the Chinese are publicising this probably means they don't plan to do it next week, because that would be pretty dumb. But they're trying to intimidate Taiwan into negotiations towards some kind of confederation or unification without actually firing a shot in anger. Now, the US, sadly, because of Afghanistan and Iraq for 20 years, has not shaped its forces in an optimal way to deal with the Chinese. We are not shaping our forces in an optimal way to deal with maritime conflict. We're, you know, investing tens of billions of dollars in tanks and armour for armoured vehicles and so on. They're not going to help you in the Taiwan Straits or the South China Sea. So the Chinese may believe that the best time for them to attack is in the next couple of years. And I think this is a very disturbing video, because it shows that they're willing to make these threats publicly, and it is quite a credible military campaign that this video outlines.
Absolutely, and its timing so close to Xi's speech and the centenary is no mistake, as you well know. Greg, thanks for your insights. As always, we love having you on the show.